I think all these words are made up. It's just applications, chains, and there's bridges, and there's proofs, right? Everything else is just like this made up terminology, this like made to sell you something.
Essentially, just like throw away all the like L2,
Yeah.
L3 validator stuff. It's complicated,
Yes.
and like you just have like an application.
It's just an application.
Yeah, it's all applications.
It's just an application. I think successful applications will just kind of own the entire stack. They don't need to rely on validators. They can just be the
Mhm.
application and define the rules.
Rollkit, the unstoppable stack, but it's not for building L2s or L3s or any other complicated crypto terms. Manav from Rollkit says it's for building unstoppable applications. Manav is the lead engineer of Rollkit, which has been a Celestia side project in stealth for a couple of years now. This was a mind-opening conversation, so let's get to it.
What is Rollkit in the shortest, most concise sentence?
It is the stack. It's the unstoppable stack to build whatever, like what Celestia emphasizes. But like, how do you actually do that? Kind of enabling all those paths for you to actually do that, which is build whatever.
Okay, so why the unstoppable stack, and what is the purpose of Rollkit more specifically, more in depth?
Why the unstoppable stack? So it is kind of, we sort of think blockchains as a way for you to when you write a chain, right, you're like just encoding rules, right? And if those rules are being followed, that's like you can run a full node to verify that. Or if you want to talk to other blockchains, right, you just have a light client on-chain light client there. And there's nothing necessarily, like, people are used to thinking like, oh, blockchains need like you need to bootstrap a validator set, from scratch, because there's some customized things want to do, or you can only do a centralized sequencer, or you can like plug into, there's like a bunch of things people come up with. But you can actually do a lot more and have your consensus algorithm, and kind of like you can have this unbounded set of your, like, whoever you want to participate in the blockchain, in your chain. um, and that is like what unstoppable means, is like once you put it out there, there's no way to stop it, unless you, maybe, like, there's an assumption of there's a censorship resistant base layer you're working on. But like, unless you bring that down, there's literally no way your thing can ever go down. There's no That is like what unstoppable means. Like, you can build like unstoppable apps with just full stack customizability. There's nothing you cannot do at on a chain with the validator set, or something you own full stack. There's nothing you can do on this. That's like what unstoppable means.
Okay, so all I know is that it uses the Cosmos SDK. It's sort of like a roll-up framework, an application framework. Could you like give me more on the architecture on that side?
Yeah. So Rollkit, it is a team that's the team is part of Celestia Labs, but the Rollkit is a separate product, right? And how it started is like, okay, like, we want to have, when Celestia was being built by Celestia Labs team, they were like, okay, if you build this thing, who is going to use this? Right? Like, we need rollup, we need like a way to build these things. So okay, let's figure out what those things look like. And Celestia uses the Cosmos SDK, so they're like, okay, like, let's just use the Cosmos SDK and figure out how we can have, like, let's say a Comet BFT version. Let's say like Comet BFT exists, a framework to build blockchains, right? And why Celestia exists is like, oh, like, you don't need to do all these things to bootstrap a chain, which is just bootstrap a validator set and like spend a bunch of money, which in each valid, like, validators are usually cost like tens of millions of dollars a year, because that's the cost you need to pay, like, each validator. Each validator is like a professional team. I've got these somewhere. But if the whole purpose was like, oh, we can like have these chains be just built in a more flexible way. All you need is like this base layer, censorship resistant base layer, and now you can just build these chains. So that's kind of how Rollkit started. So it was initially like oh, should we fork Comet BFT? Or I think initially we were like, oh, instead of forking Comet BFT and changing a bunch of things, let's just build our own thing that just like uses a bunch of Comet BFT types, because Comet BFT is like tightly coupled with Cosmos SDK, at least for now. With V2 that changes, but that's what initially Rocket started as. So it uses the ABCI interface. It was like the main app framework to build with was Cosmos SDK, right? And it's like, okay, let's get this to mainnet ready stage. So now we are at a stage where people are actually building testnets, and mainnets it's a fully audited version that people can use. Um, so that is what it was started as, right? And then now it's like, okay, we are using the ABC interface. We have this typical like kind of things you do, how you would run a roll up, but there's no enshrined bridge. There's no enshrined bridge that it comes with. You just spin up a chain, and if you want to establish bridges, you just do it on demand. It's like more natural way to think about it. If you build a chain, you don't like build a bridge with it, right? If like Ethereum was built, there's no enshrined bridge with it. Same with Celestia, right? Or whatever chain that was built initially, there's no bridges that come with it. So why do we think about uh, rollups? I guess here as I guess if you want to define rollups as like something that comes with enshrined bridge, then you can just say it's not a rollup, but it is just a way to launch your chain without, which is like a, we used to use sovereign blockchains, but you can kind of think of it just like you just deploy an app, which is in this case a DA layer like Celestia. You just deploy an app, and a rollup is just like a function of the DA layer. So and that function can just be whatever. It can be, yeah, you can define it however you want, and we're trying to basically have it capture all the full spectrum of what that thing can be, what that function can be, and we can talk more about that as well. That's interesting.
Okay, so it's sort of like just an application that like you can deploy on like Amazon AWS, except it's like the crypto verifiable version. And so
Exactly. It's a blockchain. It's an application built as a blockchain, right? With all the things you can do with a blockchain. So you have your full stack. Yeah.
you just have your application, and then like the exact code that you use or how you determine your like state transition function, that's just like the roll up part, I guess. But uh I'm having trouble understanding. So you have like Celestia, there's like no bridge, and then where's the code? Does it start at ABCI plus plus? Does it start at Comet BFT, the Cosmos SDK, or is it customizable? Explain that more.
Yeah. So how we're building it is you can choose. So right now it's Cosmos Decay, right? Um, uh, Cosmos, we're also working with the Cosmos Decay V2 to have their own interface, but then also making it so that you can just talk to any sort of state machine directly. So that could be the Cosmos Decay, that could be the EVM, could be the SVM, whatever you want. And what Rollkit is doing here, when you spin up a chain, you would write your state machine logic, right? However you want, and then you will decide things like, okay, what are my rules beyond that? The state transition function is one part, right, of your chain. I guess that does construct the constraint and consist of the entire chain, but blocks are made how are blocks made? So if I want to have execute a state transition function, I have to pass in a bunch of transactions kind of to it, right? That's like maybe one way how like, okay, yeah, this bunch of transactions that consists of a block, right? That's what a blockchain is. But how are these transactions even constructed? How do they get from the user to this list of transactions, right? And how do you even get to that state root? You can customize turns out you can customize a lot more than that, right? And that can be so Rollkit exists as this thing. You can choose your sequencing. How do you want your sequencing to be done, right? You could choose your fork choice rule. In the future, this is something we plan to do. Kind of how are the blobs going to a rollup block? How is that being actually done? You can have multiple current proposers too for like your blob construction, right? Or let's say you want a certain group of people who satisfy some sort of proof, um, be a block proposer. You can have that. Like traditionally, that's a validator set. Like people just get a bunch of validators, and they're like, okay, this group of 100 people is in the set. Anyone can stake, and you can join this thing, which now gives you the right to be a leader to propose. But then why is that? Like you can, since you already have a censorship resistant base layer, that's a rollup as a function of the DA layer. You can take a bunch of blobs, and then you can just figure out. You can be very creative with it on how you want to combine that to choose your list of transactions for a rollup block, and then you can put that into this thing we call the execution API to run it through a state transition function, and then have a new state root. And then we're also doing this sort of the for the proving aspect, and how do you go from that chain to another chain if you're just using zk proofs directly. So that's kind of a good way to think about it. It was initially just like think of it as just like a drop-in replacement to Comet BFT. So you could take Cosmos SDK with Comet BFT, replace it with Rollkit, and that would become your rollup with a centralized sequencer. But now it's kind of just like going much, much more beyond that. We're just adding more expressivity to the entire stack.
Okay, so I think that's a good base level understanding, but like, let's talk more on the, I guess, history, the origin story of Rollkit and like how it started. I guess more in detail. I guess how you got into the project as well.
Yeah, sure. I can start with how I got into project. So I I did my bachelor's, master's in computer science from Stanford, and then I moved to New York, and I was working at a hedge fund. Um, but then I was kind of always like I'd also built like this done cryptography at Stanford with Dan Bonet. It's like a like done research with him. But then I kind of had stepped away for a year. That was like my initial introduction to uh, the whole like crypto in general, like this cryptography, and then also all the like Bitcoin, Ethereum, all how zk snarks are constructed, stuff like that. That was my initial like kind of how I was interested in it. But then I took a break for a year, and then in 2021 I built some smart contracts on the side. Kind of got back into it because I had those skills from uh, school, and then I ended up just working at a hedge fund after in New York after college. But then I saw when I saw Celestia, like I think in January 2022, is when I was just like, this is something. I just messaged Nick, who's the COO. It's like, hey, can I work here? This is like super cool. I just read I read the thing, but I never found something that I would leave to join something else for until like this came. Like everything was like, okay, this is something, but I don't know if I'll like go full time for this. So that's kind of when I was like, I saw this and I was like, this makes so much sense technically, and like this like technically makes so much sense. And then you see like the group of people who are building it were like seemed really cool. So that's kind of how I got into it. Started as an engineer on this team, which was initially called Optimint, um, and then it changed into like Rollman because it was like, oh, it's not just optimistic like chains, right? And then it switched to Rollkit at some point. That's kind of how I got into it. And then I was doing engineering on the project. And then at some point, I think last year, there was this sort of everyone just engineer. So we kind of needed was like, okay, like now we're actually launching. We kind of need more than just engineering. We need more product marketing, like more talking to users, stuff like that. So that's kind of when I stepped up to be leading the project.
So, how long has Rollkit been in development? It's been
It was one person till like 2022, mid 2022, and like like Ismail was the CTO of Celestia. They were working on it together, but then it's kind of like then I joined 2022. Josh Bowen from Astria was like on this before, right? And in 2022, he kind of went to make Astria. So it's two of us, and then we got like a group of like 3 4 people. So since 2023 is kind of when early 2023 when it's like really like okay where we there was a lot of more people working on it, um, right? Early 2023, and then like 2024 early is kind of when we were like okay we're ready to we have audits and just like ready to kind of have people start using it. So we have a bunch of teams building on it now, and then how it's progressing is like it's kind of expanding beyond just the design space more for blockchains.
So originally it was optimistic and it was Optimint with the Cosmos SDK, and
Yeah.
then more people joined, and then it was no
Yeah.
longer optimistic,
Yeah.
and then
I did.
more things happened.
Yeah. So it was
Sorry, go on.
optimistic. It was optimistic because so I actually spent the first like 6 months of Celestia sort of that, just fraud proving the Cosmos SDK. So I wrote a bunch of code that, and I have like an ADR. If you find, you can find it on you can find an ADR somewhere to fraud prove the Cosmos SDK, like how that like the whole mechanics would work. So there is a working demo for that, like how you would like someone can dispute a fraud proof and it would like take the pre-state, load it into the Cosmos SDK, and then run a bunch of transactions, and if the state root doesn't match, stuff like that. But then it became like then we were like okay, like we should first start to actually let's just start with something we call pessimistic mode, which is okay, anyone who wants to verify that chain gets run a full node. That's how any blockchain really works, right? You don't have to start with an on-chain like client. That's what like I think but then you're just an island, right? You're just all your own island. Now, if you need bridges, you have to have all these multi-sigs, right? But like that's not something like longer term that you want. So now establishing on-chain like clients is something you need proofs for. So we were like, okay, like we're working on this proof size, but like everything else before that, we still need to do all that. So let's do that first. We can use these, I guess, the multi-sigs bridges initially, and then we can transition over to like you don't need to necessarily have uh, bridging necessarily as like so the things that makes sense as your standalone chain, unless you're importing a lot of liquidity, which maybe is fine. That's something you can also do. But things that make a lot more sense as your own thing is like where the native value is created within that chain, you know. So something like for example, the Celestine Law Society, right? They're launching their own chain. It's called the Lazy Chain. Because why does that make sense? Because it's their community is like what that NFT collection is like a native. The value is like native to that, right? If they are their own chain, yes, they can import liquidity from outside as well, but a lot of the value of that comes from the culture and that team or that community itself, right? The same with gaming or something, or like things which are like service provider chains, like there's like AI and inference kind of chains, those exist. But a bunch of things, like if you think about it, like it makes sense to be start as an island and then establish bridges versus like you're tied down to one. You just everyone just kind of wants their own thing. End of the day, that's how we think about it. Everyone just ended up owning the entire stack if they're building, like if they are successful, because why would you leak any value somewhere else? So
Mhm.
that's kind of what it is about.
And so there's a lot of projects like they did the optimistic route because the ZK stuff was like complicated,
Yeah,
but then now ZK stuff is like no longer complicated. Can you talk
exactly.
about
Exactly.
ZK VMs and all that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so like I said, right? We had this whole like fraud proving thing to fraud proof the Cosmos SDK and stuff, right? But then like if you think about it, the end UX is still going to be like 7 days or something, or even if you have a like single round fraud proof, sure you could put it down under like a day or something. It basically depends on how hard is it to censor the base layer. Um, so we were kind of doing that direction initially, right? But then this year there's just been explosion of like these zk VMs coming in, right? So We're like, okay, we're looking at this and we're like, okay, why don't we, instead of building this whole hopper system for the SDK and SDK, the Cosmos SDK, they're also figuring out like ZK proving the entire stack. So like, why should we go and try to fraud proof the entire stack and then we come back like 6 to 8 months after, once we have this, oh, they already figured out how to ZK proof. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to build something that is not going to be, we spend time on that. But we can still, so we were like, okay, like there's example succinct thing with Zero. They have like a ZK EVM that they just introduced, right? So and that just came to market like less than a month ago, right? There's OP succinct now. So like, okay, like we can just use this thing that exists as a ZK VM. Like it looks like the prices, like the cost per transaction to prove is like coming to like tenth of a cent kind of. So if you're charging like, if you're targeting like a cent per transaction or something, that kind of becomes reasonable too. Something at least with succinct, that is like what we found. So we were like, okay, let's just use them. Let's go after the EVM, right? Have a EVM with Rollkit that just you can have a ZK uh, client to Celestia. So Celestia is adding ZK accounts. So you can have that. But why don't we do that? And then once Cosmos SDK is also ZK proving its stack, we can come back to it. And once that's done, we can just add that as like something that's supported onto Rollkit. And it can handle all the, I think they're doing a lot of great stuff to like make it like have Rust modules or have the EVM just directly there, or you can even multiplex different VMs. Like that's kind of what they're doing. I think it can become like really good in that. But instead of like blocking on that, we were like, okay, we can do this thing with just the pure EVM, and we can use something like Reth, which is also super fast now. So that can be like a good edge for someone why they would choose this, right? And it doesn't have like, so one main thing with Rollkit is like it doesn't need to it assumes that the base layer has single stop finality because it like Celestia has single stop finality, right? So that was kind of its roots, right? So we just didn't really care about all the real logic you might need to do. So like 80% of like what exists on Ethereum rollup stacks, there's just real logic. 80% of the code of optimism or arbitrum.
What is that again? Say that again.
So to handle reorgs,
Oh, okay.
since it's not single stop finality, right? Something if you use if you use like a single stop finality chain as the base layer, something you get is you don't have to deal with all that complexity of needing to track a bunch of state on what it will reorg or whatever. As you don't need to enshrine that like think about it, like 80% of your code to build a chain is just like to figure out the something you can do right now on your base layer. And like Ethereum is also like planning on doing single self finality, right? I don't know, maybe in like a couple of years it will have that. But after it does that, all that 80% of a code is just useless now. So why would you build something,
Hmm.
use that, right? Why not like choose something that where we're headed is kind of like the first principles thinking.
So you guys were originally bound to the Cosmos SDK and optimistic technology, but
Yeah,
then like the ZK stuff like changed all that.
yeah,
Now you don't need to be optimistic. It's ZK, and you don't absolutely need to be the Cosmos SDK. And so that's why you
yes,
guys are like Rollkit can let you like use anything because of just like this new uh I guess it's just new way of building rollups. Was this expected to be for ZK rollups to be like this accessible now?
I think it was not expected. Definitely, this was something that also came as a surprise, right? I think so for VMs that if they don't, hopefully we don't need to do this. But uh, if you do, if the VM is very hard to prove, something you're using that, but you can still prove it. Let's say you can prove it in like a day, right? Uh, like let's say that's kind of where we are for some very complex VMs. Maybe I think if to you could add like an optimistic when mode after that on top of that, so that the zk proof that we already will have is just going to be only generated when there is a fraud, right? So someone's, but then you actually need like staking and bonding kind of things. So since there needs to be a consequence, so there needs to be some sort of committee of like people who can stake and post state roots, and then it can get slashed only when there's a zk proof of the correct state root that verifies, right? If someone posts a wrong state root, they'll never verify, uh, assuming there's no prover bugs. um, so that's kind of like another thing we can add, but I think it's just getting like really fast in the sense that maybe we won't need to add it. But we can certainly add it as like something later on. But it is like bridging to us, like optimistic or zk mode is just like a bridge specific thing. It's not like a roll up thing. Roll ups are just roll ups. It's just a blockchain. It's not zk or optimistic. It's just a function. How you prove to someone else like how what your state is, that bridging mechanism sure could be zk optimistic. And why like people have always considered like, oh, when you say roll, I was like, oh, zk optimistic, that's because like of the enshrine bridge that like comes with it, because it chose one of them. You don't need to choose. Turns out, right? You can just uh, establish bridges when your chain is up.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
So I guess now let's get into, so you can like choose any VM.
yeah.
You can then, what would be directly under it? It would be,
Under the VM. So first thing you need
yes.
to figure out is how your transactions make it into your VM, right? A lot of teams, they're like, okay, we'll bootstrap a validator set, and then everyone gets like this chance to rotate and become the proposer for a block, right? And then you have, turns out you vote over that thing too, right? Or you could do that, right? You could still have your own sequencer set, I guess, in this case. But the entire like the chain is a function of the base layer. So you don't necessarily need to even have that. So some people are like, okay, we don't need to do that. Let's just have a centralized sequencer, and then the bridge is what determines like what the validity is of this chain, right? Okay, that's why it's like we call it a cellular rollup. Sure, right? You can also look at it as it's actually its own chain. It's a sovereign chain just with an on-chain like to Ethereum, right? If I'm not using the bridge, I don't necessarily need to. I can just, if I'm not using the bridge, if most of the value is native, why would I need to prove to someone exactly like this? Someone could just run a full node. If there's an exchange I want to withdraw to, they could just run a full node, right? That's what happens
Hmm.
for
And
any
so,
chain. Yeah.
because the initial design constraint was like the smart contract, then you needed a centralized sequencer. But turns out if you use just like Celestia, like a decentralized base layer with single stop finality, you can just submit your transactions directly to that.
Yeah, you could do that, or you could have someone else like quote unquote sequence your transaction, or like put your transactions together. So it's, and then post it on Celestia, right? So Celestia, when you post on it, it is a blob, or we kind of like just like we kind of generalize the DA layer, right? Using this interface also, but then I think let's just talk in terms of so Rollkit doesn't necessarily need to know what DA layer it is on, but so it does support like other things as well. But then I think right now, at least all our users are on are on Celestia, right? So we're just kind of focused on that. We are focused on so like Celestia's native ecosystem to grow that. So yeah, like you will just post blobs. Turns out anyone can post blobs, right, on this chain on your like namespace, let's say, of your rollup, um, and that list of blobs you can kind of interpret it however you want. In order to, you could have some people who posted individual transactions in a blob, some people who took a bunch of transactions together and posted as a blob, right? And you can look at all those blobs and it's like, okay, like how do I want to derive my next my chains block, right? And you could have multiple current proposers if you want. You could just choose the, let's say, the ones that burn the highest gas of your chain, right? Or let's say you want for you want a unique person to have a blob each, right? You want to give everyone the opportunity. You could you could verify, let's say, like there's this stuff like ZK passport now, so you could verify a proof of personhood as a mechanism for how you're like how you derive a roller blob, which is basically like you can customize your proof of whatever you want. Is it proof of stake, proof of work, proof of personhood, proof of anything you can generate proof of, right? So
Hmm.
it is traditionally a set of signatures that you verify, but like turns out it doesn't need to be just a set of committee or a signature. It can be an unbounded set of people who can prove something, right? So that can be, you can kind of customize how you go from that blobs list to your transactions list, however, and you can even change the ordering, right? So if for stuff like people, there's a lot of like value from reordering transactions, right? Or the ordering matters a lot for MEV. You could just use this layer sensitive resonance as an inclusion. How you get an inclusion? You can get inclusion guarantees from something like a shared sequencer like Astria as well, right? Or you do it from a centralized sequencer, or like that you can add force inclusion for your centralized sequencer too. Like, oh, like you have to, like looking at all the blobs at the end of the day, like you look at the DA layer and you derive what your, if the rules were fall hollowed, you actually prove the how you deserialize the transactions and blobs as a ZK proof when you bridged anywhere, right? Or your full node is always looking at that DA layer as well. So you can construct your like list of transactions from these blobs in whatever rule you want. So that's something we're doing with the sequencing API, and we'll have something
Hmm.
called a fork choice interface. So you can kind of choose how you would look at this DA layer and construct your list of transactions. And you can come up with very creative ways for doing that. I think the design space is like something we haven't seen explored a lot. People are like thinking about decentralized sequencers, shared sequencers, and based mode, or they're thinking about validator sets. But there's this like new fifth thing that you can actually use and really be. It's just like that's what makes you unstoppable. You can code that
Hmm.
unstoppability in your chain.
So the reason why this is quote unquote a sequencer that doesn't sequence, and you can use like whatever spectrum of like centralized sequencer, decentralized, shared sequencers like Astria or like literally anything, is because you can have or direct inclusion, which is like the base roll up territory, is
Yeah,
because you can send your transactions to Celestia. I'm sorry, and then you have the ordering. It doesn't matter the ordering because then you could just reorder the transactions
yeah,
according to whatever uh,
yeah. Rule you have.
arbitrary code.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Let's say like DeFi chain. Let's say, right. Let's say for example, you want to have the people who will add the most value to your chain. Like let's say for LPs, there's a bunch of transactions that are like doing swaps or adding liquidity, removing liquidity, whatever. You want to optimize the value, this utility function for your LPs of like on your chain, right? You can choose your how you which blobs you pick. Anyone can post a blob, right? A user could do it. Someone who is sequencing could do it. Whatever, right? Could do it. You can combine this rule and choose either one of those blobs that you want for your rollup block, right? Or you can combine those in a certain way, right? However you want. You can do like these blobs. You could order them before, let's say, or you could then unpack it. You could order them again if you want, and all that control is with the application, right? That is for the chain. So you can customizing sort of everything, and then you have this list of transactions, and then you are then defining how these transactions are even interpreted. So you have this executor in Rollkit. So that executor can choose their state machine. So the EVM or Cosmos SDK or the SVM or Move, like that's kind of what we're sort of doing. How those transactions are interpreted, you can even write your own, like it could just be interpreted by a Rust state machine or something customized you wrote. um, and then you just get a new state root, right? And that is what how you construct your header. That is it. As long as it's a deterministic function for doing that, you're fine. That's just how you define. You just define the function, and that's your chain. And if someone wants to now bridge to that chain, bridge from that chain, you can choose it's if it's a multisig, if it's an optimistic mode or ZK mode or whatever. That's up to you when you establish the bridge.
Mhm. Yeah, that is crazy. Like I'm still so you get application specific sequencing. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, you get application specific
Just
sequencing. Yeah, of course, you just get it out of the box.
uh-huh.
But another thing you can do is you can actually look at other chains too. If you share the same DA layer, you can look at other chains blobs too. That's where it gets crazy. But yeah, we can go into that if you want. But
No, no, let's get into it.
oh, I was gonna okay, yeah. So something like something you get from sharing now. All of these things, these chains or apps, are just a they're just a function of the DA layer, right? So there's a bunch of these functions of the DA layers that you can look at, and all the sort of headers or proofs or whatever you want to have for all these chains, you can just have them on the same shared DA layer, right? And now you don't need things like relayers. I can just read another chain state to verify, like, or to bridge directly if I want to bridge, or let's say I want to do an action based on another chain state or precondition my sequencing or precondition my like how I construct my chain. So you can have like since each of these chains is a function of the data layer, you can actually compose these functions, and your function can be can embed the function of another chain. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does. So you have like a full Celestia block,
Yeah,
and then let's say like half of the blobs are yours,
yeah,
and you're reading Celestia your blobs, but you can also just like be like, I also want to read those guys' blobs and have ordering against
yeah,
whatever function you
yeah,
want.
yeah. Like exactly, right? So let's say a concrete example, right? Let's say there's lazy chain, right? And let's say there's another chain defun, right? That's on Rollkit. Now both of them are posting blobs on Celestia to construct their chain, right? What constructs, what defines that chain. They could, like, if defun wanted that, let's say they want like the slot holders to have priority and how the blocks are ordered. Oh, like we'll let, if you are a slot holder, we'll actually let you um, prioritize or like order my, like you can be top of the block, so top of the block auctions. You can have give them a priority just because they're hold some sort of other state on the chain. So you can precondition on that state, right? That's something just like entirely possible now, and that basically makes this shared base layer like very very powerful um, in this case is
Yeah,
using
that
that.
is that is extremely extremely cool.
Yeah.
I guess so. We talked about the VM, we talked about like sequencing, and then I guess let's. I think we touched on bridging. Is there any other
Bridging,
parts that I'm not thinking of?
sequencing, there's a DA, right? Sequencing is DA, there's bridging, there's execution, there's a folk choice rules, like how, I guess you can consider that maybe part of sequencing too, right? You can plug into all these sequencing things that are coming, right? There's shared sequencers that are coming. You could have based mode if you want, right? That's something maybe lazy chain might do in the future, just because it's very very close to Celestia. So it can use that as how the ordering of the Celestia validators as what it'll inherit. That's something we call a pure folk choice rule, where you just inherit the folk choice rule that is all, or the inclusion and ordering guarantees on the base layer, right? That's like you can also enable base rollups with this. So the kind of, I don't know why people like are like, oh, we have the base rollup stack, we have the centralized sequencer stack, we have the validator stack. You kind of just like choose whatever you want, right? That's like, and if you want, if something doesn't work for you, you just switch it out. That's something like how we design this thing is you can just switch that out. It's just like a gRPC connection to the box on how you get sequencing. can just switch that out, and that will technically change your rollups, like your chains, like state transition function. Uh, but that's something you can do. You can swap out these things easily because we still don't know who are the leaders in each of these categories, right? So that's like you can see that as like a I guess it's like an advantage of being sort of neutral, right? You just sort of enable to customize to whatever of these like specific flavors people are building, and then in order to build our app, you can just have like full stack customizability, control every part of your stack, uh, and still like not necessarily need to pay a large amount to a bunch of validators or like stake based committee based systems necessarily. You don't even have to
Mhm.
stick to them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is extremely cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to like get into?
Other things, I mean, we can talk about maybe the applications that are being built on OKit. So it's like more of like a what are the unique sort of why you would choose this architecture, right? So like I said, lazy chain is one of them. Um, that's for the Celestine Law Society. Uh, Defund is another chain which is like going to be this um, place for the like the module. It's going to be like a modular liquidity hub. Um, so it's going to have things like options and your like bunch of like, any like super fast anything you can do on a DeFi chain. It's just like really fast. That's kind of like what they're covering with a really good UX. So they'll have embedded wallets. You can use it on your phone, and you can kind of get get from any chain to like their chain really easily. So that's like another one. There's solver networks. Um, there's like a chain called Kashmir. It's like still kind of being built right now. But sort of anything you can do as like a as an app as a chain, but it's just like something which is then faster to go to market for your chain instead of like bootstrapping a whole validator set is kind of how people have thought about launching chains as like a full chain with your own control all over everything. That's what people have thought about. And then when people think of the other spectrum as rollups, people think of like a centralized sequencer which enshrine bridge, but like that's not something. This is like sort of entirely different way. Um,
Hmm.
there's Stargaze is launching their own NFT marketplace called Astra. Um, so that's going to be another like the product hook is speed, since you can have really fast blocks. Right? If you're using a centralized sequencer, you can have really fast blocks. So some chains want to lean into it, and maybe some chains won't want to lean into it, right? But if you don't, you can also have that whenever you want. There's another chain called Last L2. They already have an L1, but they really like the sequencing aspect, so they can use their L1 for sequencing and still and not necessarily change the ordering. You can override the ordering if you're using another chain as your sort of sequencing layer, but they want to retain the ordering of that chain since they want all the economic activity to be coming from that chain. It's like a it's more for cash flows. It's like cash flow focused chain that Last is building. There's gaming things like Argus is building on Rollkit, um, and there's art chains. Something I'm excited about as well. It'll be like uh, these pieces of arts which are kind of just changing themselves, or like there's some programmable cryptography like as over the passage of time, like they're evolving, right, based on some sort of function they added, let's say, or people can even interact with it, this piece of art, and then that can be like a sort of it's like a sculpture. You can kind of go and uh, I guess sculptures you can't really interact with, but these are kind of things you can interact with as well, but they'll just be built as chains, because there's just much more power you get as a chain, and all the value again is native. Um, so those are some examples of things that are being built. Um, on Rollkit, the initial users. Yeah.
So for these applications, I know there's like these like L3 movement. Do you think that's essentially pointless? Like with this design, would you have L3s on Celestia, or you just have all L2s, or all not even
Yeah.
L2s? You just stop thinking about settled smart contracts, L3,
Yeah.
that whole deal.
So L2s, L3s, all these words, it's all made up words, right? But these are just like, okay, what does it mean? Because you have an enshrined bridge. Okay, is it we are building a chain that's an enshrined bridge, and somehow you define the chain with the enshrined bridge. I don't, like that's kind of how I guess things happen in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? Okay, we're just gonna build these as network like extensions of Ethereum or extensions. It's kind of how it's seen, but like how we think about it is not that. It's more like they're their own thing. You're building your app. It's like it's just your app. It's just like a full. You just get full stack customizability, and then whatever bridge you want, bridge is just like something you add to the chain. It's not. It doesn't have to be like a core part of your chain. It's not how you necessarily define the chain. Um, just like how like people call traditionally L1s, they don't come with an enshrined bridge, right? They're just their own thing, and you can establish a bridge if you want. So like in a Rollkit chain, what we're doing right now is you can have a Rollkit chain with an EVM, right? Which is just going to be posting blobs on customizing how your blobs are go and constructed, the transactions get constructed. You can customize all that, um, and you can use an EVM, right? But it doesn't come with a bridge to Celestia necessarily. Like you can add it, I guess, if people want, but you could just make that, and then you can establish a bridge. You can establish a bridge to another chain directly. You could do it to Celestia directly as well with Celestia ZK accounts. That's something we're adding right now, so Celestia can verify the execution proofs of a Rollkit chain. So we're working with the protocol team on there. But the bridges are something you just establish once you come back. There's no limits. There's no need to be like one bridge. You can create a free market for bridges, right? Why does it need to be like this one bridge that is the canonical one? It can just be bridges like how like at least in the Cosmos ecosystem there's just like IBC. Everyone just kind of it just comes out of the box. You just have IBC, and you can just talk to different chains, right? You just establish that after your chain spins up. You don't just like you enshrine it.
Yeah.
That's the thought
So
process.
I asked that question. So we have this application, and then you send blobs to Celestia. It's a censorship resistant base layer, and that's what makes it unstoppable.
Yeah.
And so the way you think about this are like, could you have a sort of microservices architecture where it's just like, let's say if you want to like run Coinbase, you could have like multiple rollups for just one, I guess, brand, or like one multiple applications that use Celestia under one brand. Do you think that we're going to have large fat applications, or you think we're going to have multiple sort of small microservices?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, yeah, so I think that is something so some people are doing, right? That's kind of how you can that's where the sort of L2 mentality comes in, right? Like when people are building L2s initially, like all the teams that build L2s initially, they're like we're we want to be very close to Ethereum, right? So we want to build these or not network extensions, that's a Solana thing, but we want to build these extensions where just kind of have the enshrined bridge to Ethereum. So we want to be very close to it. That's the only bridge really that's going to be like our uh, canonical thing, right? This is going to be our chain is defined by Ethereum. So we're like, oh, we're like part of Ethereum, right? That's what they said, right? And now a bunch of these L2s came. People want to launch chains. They some of them they just want to build an app. They don't really care about the bridge sometimes. So you'll see like a bunch of the L2s that exist. Like if you look go an L2 beat, like some of them like only like 10% or 20% of the value is really coming from that bridge, right? But they're still constantly paying this sort of cost of quote unquote settling, which is literally just an on-chain like client, which I'm just proving this is what happened. Why do I need to prove it constantly? I can just prove when I like want to interact with this thing, right? It's just like I don't know. That doesn't make so much sense to me. And some of these, like, they're just paying for this cost. This is just an extra cost they're paying constantly for no reason. It can just be asynchronous um, composability. So I think that's kind of how it started, and that just carried on. That trend just carried on, right? But then all these people who want to build chains, they don't really care about the enshrined bridge. Mostly, they do care about having a liquidity source, having being when they launch the chain, getting liquidity to that chain should be seamless. It shouldn't even feel like anything, right? You can still have that without an enshrined bridge. Why? So I think if you further that mentality, then yeah, you could have a chain that just chooses to have other chains built on top of it, which top of it is just really the only bridge that exists is this. We're just gonna have that bridge, right? So this is something like Stargaze is doing, for example, right? They have their own chain, they have their own Comet BFT chain, and they're building a Rollkit chain with Cosmos and with the NFT marketplace, right? And they're like, yeah, we're gonna just have the only bridge it's gonna be have is to Stargaze, right? So I guess that makes it a layer two, if you want to say that, sure, right? Whatever that means. That's the only bridge, right? And that's like the it's using IBC, and all this a bunch of the Stargaze validators are running full nodes of the chain. So there's no trust assumptions between those chains. There's only the classic, just like everyone's. It's just a validator set doing it. So I think if you wanted something like that, yes, definitely you could build chains that restrain the bridge to one thing, and you could call those um, parts of like the same brand, right? So what Last
Mhm.
is doing,
Yeah.
Stargaze is doing. It's what all the Ethereum L2s initially did. Uh, so yeah, some people want to do that. Like yeah, feel free. I know whatever you want. Um,
Mhm. Yeah. So essentially, the L3s is like, I don't want to say it's like a forced like walled garden, but it's like you can only view through one of these chains when you don't have to at all.
Yeah,
That like,
you can just establish bridges on demand, right? Like this hyperlane that exists. Hyperlane can establish bridges from like these core L2s to directly to L2s, right? Could do that. There's nothing that stops them, right? Um, so, but there's like just the canonical bridge is the one that's enshrined. But like, yeah, again, you don't need to enshrine the bridge. Um,
mhm.
so what like there's been this like sort of debate of like what defines a roll up, what defines chain. Like okay, in a traditional sort of chain building where you just build an L1, right? Okay, the validators decide what the chain is, right? Okay, sure. You bootstrap a validator set and like have a basically a large committee that is going to decide, right? And they're going to rotate. Sure, that can decide. Another thing is that people can okay, like we can have a centralized sequencer, but then actually the enshrined bridge decides. The bridge decides it. That can be like another thing, right? But in the end of the day, it's actually like your you what that's usually what the chains want is there is blockchains are just coordination mechanisms end of the day between humans. It's those humans that should define what that is. Like the validator set mentality is like okay, you elect a committee and the humans depend on that committee, but like there's no reason the humans can just like those people who want to coordinate, they can just be the ones that are like posting these blobs or going through someone else that they want that they like or they want to post these blobs for them. And in the end of the day, it's that like it's just this unbounded set of people that define how your chain is made and goes on and what rules it like you can kind of just codify the rules, you know. It's your nodes that decide the nodes including full nodes and light nodes. So that's something else we want to enable, to have roll up off chain like clients too for these chains, have an off chain like client which is fully trust minimized. That's something right now people are just focused on like on chain trust minimized clients, so you're proving the entire state to another chain. You can have that. You can also have that for off-chain light clients, which are just kind of things that run in wallets directly. So users are directly verifying the chain when they're using the your chain. So turns out like it just makes this design just makes it really easy to do that.
Yeah, that's way more simple. So essentially just like throw away all the like L2,
Yeah.
L3 validator stuff. It's complicated
Yes.
and like you just have like an application.
It's just an
Do you
application.
think
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's all applications.
It's just an application. Application, I think applications will successful applications will just kind of own the entire stack. They don't need to rely on validators. They can just be the
Mhm.
application and define the rules however they want. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just applications, chains, and there's bridges. I guess bridges are just on-chain like clients, and there's nodes. That's it. Like that's everything. All these like other words, and there's proofs, right? All the other words are sort of like people just came up with these words. I don't know. I think all these words are made up. Obviously, like right? Proofs maybe not. Like proofs, nodes, chains, applications are not. They're real. That's what people use. End of the day, everything else is just like this made up
mhm,
terminology, just like made to sell you something. Probably. I don't know.
mhm.
Yeah.
So rollups aren't real, applications are.
Oh, yeah. Applications. It's just applications. End of the day, there's like all these other
Yeah,
things. I'm an L1. I'm an L2. Whatever you are, it's just your architecture you chose to build your application, right? um, Whatever, right? Like that's not something users care about. Users just care about your application and how you built the application is up to your team on what makes sense, what makes business sense on your spend or the kind of flexibility you can give or like if you can own the entire thing, you can own your fee market, you can configure everything. That's something I think at the end of the day applications want, maybe not initially, after they mature they want it. So that's kind of what we're building to enable these applications to just fully customize their stack. So
yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
And so what I guess applications do you think would first move on to this move on to Rollkit? Do you think Cosmos chains are first going to transition, or do you think
um,
that sort of new builders who aren't attached to any of those terminology are going to
yeah.
like just immediately hop on Rollkit? Like if someone's building an application, sort of
Yeah.
who do you think is going to be the next people who build on Rollkit?
So initially the focus was on Cosmos chains, right? Okay, like we were like, okay, people can migrate to this, or people who are building a new Cosmos SDK chain, Cosmos SDK chain, when I say, right? Uh, that was the initial focus, but like until Cosmos SDK is proven, right, and people want bridges, right, that that can be something you can have, right, with stuff like this interchain attestations, IBC and stuff, but um, that was the initial product hook that we kind of went after, and we did get like users there, right? But I think a lot of like at least in the Cosmos ecosystem, people like they don't like centralized sequencers, right? That was the initial thing that we did, right? Now you can just move beyond that and choose whatever. Um, so they don't like that, and they want IBC, right? Those are like two things that I've like noticed that the Cosmos ecosystem they care about. We don't want to look too centralized with a single sequencer, right? We still want to have a bunch of operators kind of doing this thing because you're used to these validators, right? And we want IBC, right? And IBC historically, like the most popular client is a Tendermint client, which is assumes there's a validator set, right? And if you have a single sequencer, that signature that's not going to be very secure. It's just a single signature. But that's why we're working with the IBC team to add a ZKI IBC client. It's going to verify execution proofs, right? Um, so I think that can still be there, like as a if you wanted to build a Cosmos SDK chain, but until that it gets to really gets proven, the SDK, right? Which I think that the SDK is working on it. Uh, I I think that might become a popular option with the SDK being proven for Cosmos chains, right? But I think initially, if you don't want to rely on multisigs, you just go and bootstrap a validator set with Comet BFT, or they choose one of these ways to make a validator set smaller, right? Like other ways, or they'll just have a smaller validator set, or like do it POA or something like Noble did, right? Uh, that's something you can do. So Cosmos chains is one thing, but I think what we're focusing on now is just like um, the just a EVM with it'll be a ZK EVM with the ZK VMs that we're using. So the main kind of again the main reasons why so we see most of the people who are building on Rollkit applications just doing it because it's just the more first principles ways on how you build a chain. It just makes a lot of sense in okay, you just have this base layer and you just define a function on how you want to build your chain. And that is like, if you think from the ground up without any of these enshrined bridges and stuff, it's just like becomes a very low cost option as well to go to market for as an application while retaining the full stack customizability. Yeah, I don't know. That answers your question. So that's all. I think that's all.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anyways, I guess we're gonna wrap everything up. Is there any call to action or sort of specific builders you want to call out to use Rollkit?
Call to action. We have a bunch of Rollkit's going to be like a big part of the like Celestia native ecosystem. If you're just building applications and you're not necessarily like your application can still like get seamless liquidity from anywhere, and you would like to be part of um, the native ecosystem of Celestia, where you just are focused on applications, like customizing however you want. You want full stack customizability, and whatever you don't necessarily, and you would also like, or you're looking for ideas. Let's say you want to be, and we have a whole list of things we want to see for the native ecosystem be built with Rollkit. So reach out. There's a Rollkit Telegram that exists. You could, you could use that. You could even message me directly. But yeah, that's the call to action would just be like if you're interested in building applications that don't necessarily need to, and you don't need want to think about all these infra words that exist that people have created. Just come talk to us. Yeah, build on Rollkit.
Anyways, I love it. Unstoppable
Yeah,
applications.
yeah, of
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Manav. And
course.
yeah.
Yeah, great.